Hi, Wayne Koss, please.
Speaking.
Keith Lockhart here.
Hi, Keith.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Too early to tell,
Oh,
but I'll get back with you.
Early in the day here. Anyway, I just got this disc yesterday, so I haven't had lots of time to listen to it, but what I've heard so far is outstanding.
Well, thank you.
I have heard your other two discs. So, how did this project come about, the Celtic album? Are you doing themes with your albums? Is that the approach, or?
Well, it's a lot of the concepts for the albums are actually being driven by BMG, by the RCA people, because the recording industry is a touchy place right now, and they have a fairly good idea of how they think they can market the Boston Pops. And I think a lot of the choice of the Celtic album had to deal with the fact that Celtic music, world music in general, and Celtic music in particular, is really riding a wave of popularity across the world. I mean, you look at the success of Riverdance and Lord of the Dance and movies like Braveheart and Rob Roy, and so they came to us with the idea to do that. But I think what the result was an album that only the Boston Pops could have done, because it shows a breadth of an approach to the whole idea of Celtic music that no other organization, I think, could have bitten off.
Could you go deeper into that?
Well, our approach on it was to involve not only traditional Celtic folk music, but also more contemporary Celtic sounds, including movie scores, music from Braveheart, etc. There's actually Celtic rock on this album too, in the last cut, but also Celtic influenced music, including music by Felix Mendelssohn, who was a German composer whose one of his greatest works was influenced by the time he spent on the north coast of Scotland. So I think this is probably the only album that has ever been conceived that will have a Mendelssohn tune and a Van Morrison tune on it.
That is true. So how were the tracks chosen? Did you choose them, or?
Well, it's usually a matter of I sit down with my artistic coordinator, a man named Dennis Alves, A-L-V-E-S, and the two of us listen to literally hundreds of things. We say, how would this fit in? How would this fit in? Where are we going with this? How much of this type of music do we need? A lot of it also, of course, had to do with our choice of guest artists. When we decided to use Cherish the Ladies as our Celtic folk music group with us, they'd performed with us several times, and we were really happy about the collaboration. Of course, some of their repertoire needs and interests came into being too. It was a real coup, I think, to get Eileen Ivers, who is the fiddle player who created most of the fiddle playing in Riverdance, to perform with us on Riverdance and on other points of the album as well.
Okay.
I hope you can understand me. I'm fighting a cold that makes it rather difficult to speak.
A lot of people are these days. Just, I'm not going in a particular order, but on the liner notes, they were quite informative. It didn't express who wrote those.
Who wrote the liner notes? Oh, they should have. There's quite a large credit on them, unless
in the front, the intro it did, but not the liner notes.
Oh, it's the same person.
Oh, okay.
Same person did the track notes as did the intro, Earl Hitchner.
Okay, I didn't see that. Now, did you try to make each song flow into the next? Was that part of it, or did you just select songs that?
No, it's actually one of the things that is kind of a new thing for me, and just because I don't have a long recording history, but a lot of attention has to be paid to sequencing, especially in the CD age, to come up with things that really flow really well across the whole album. And I don't think that was ever a reason that we would have left something off of the album, but we spend a lot of time playing around with order of things, thinking, how does this piece end and how does this piece begin, and what takes you on a logical progression, what takes you in the right emotional direction between one thing and the next. And I think we probably went through about 10 different orders before we settled on the one that was actually on the album.
That explains it. It really has an outstanding flow to it.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you for saying that. But it's literally, it's really funny sometimes. We end up each doing, everybody who has an interest in it and whose opinion I respect goes through the album and comes up with their own order, and then we stick them all together and see what the similarities are, and then we start bashing it out from there.
Can you comment, like, we can go, like, through the songs a little bit about each?
Sure.
That's why you chose them, the first track.
Grab one off the shelf here so
Okay.
I remember what's actually on the album.
So
well,
are you behind the promotional process of this as well? In general, like,
I'm behind it, but I'm used often in it. So.
Okay. Well, you've got a contract, what, of 4?
Of 6 albums over
4 years.
over 4 seasons, which is really one of the better, the longer term commitments in the classical recording industry these days. So, of course, it's in all of our best interest to make the relationship work out. And BMG, one of the things we liked about them, the reason we went back to them in this, starting with this agreement, is that they're a very marketing-driven company in an age that desperately needs marketing, especially for the classical arts, so they don't get noticed.
I hear they really are worldwide as well. So I know the Chieftains were very happy with them.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that's particularly interesting regarding this album, of course, is that they have, and actually was the same sort of thing in Runnin' Wild. In Running Wild, we benefited from the fact that they have a huge jazz catalog and a big jazz following, and in this, we're benefiting from the fact that they have a lot of the big market Celtic music, including, of course, the Chieftains, also James Galway and his crossover work. And so, of course, there's a little bit of a piggybacking opportunity there as well. So, in fact, they've put out their Celtic sampler disc for this current season, and we're on that. So we're hopefully, we're hoping to be able to actually be, attract people who are in the niche market who just buy, Celtic folk sort of recordings and give them something a little bit different. Okay, let me see if I can tell you what's on the album here. I can't read the back. It's the smallest printing in the world on this album, I just noticed. Well, of course,
Scotland the Brave.
Scotland the Brave is a great processional way in which to start an album or a concert or anything else. That arrangement was actually pre-existing. We've been using it for a number of years. We had a couple of occasions to do Celtic type nights with large groups of bagpipers, and so we thought that it would be a great way to start the album. When we got the Boston Piper Society on board, down to having the shout of the pipe major as he starts off the thing, and that was actually the hardest thing to record. That took the most time because it's not usual to record something where you're having to have people march up to the mics, and they actually did march. It's not electronically simulated.
Well, it sounds outstanding. Were you in the process? Are you working a lot on like leading edge technology to record, or is that part of?
Well, it's the good thing about my part of the job is that I leave that mostly in the hands of the producers. I wouldn't say that I don't know how to say this. It's certainly the fact that we live in the age of digital editing. These jobs a lot better, especially with things like like Scotland the Brave, which seemed to me be that every single time we did a take, there was another noise somewhere else in the thing. It's kind of with recording orchestras, it's kind of a weird juxtaposition between cutting edge technology and the old-fashioned way of doing things, in that we still record in Symphony Hall. We don't record in a studio sort of space where you have isolation on all the different instruments and all that. So basically we're a combination of the old-fashioned way in which they used to record an orchestra, which was essentially sticking a mic in a hall in front of an orchestra, and the best that the industry has to offer. And that makes it a little bit challenging sometimes, but I think it's probably worth the effort.
Okay. Now, next track is Riverdance.
Well, I mean, this was an obvious choice for the album. It's caught so many people's imaginations worldwide that we thought it was necessary to pay tribute to it, and also the fact that we could work with Eileen Ivers was a great thrill. Anyway, it just seemed like the most obvious thing in the world, and we were really happy with the way it came off, and I think it's going to be one of the things that people is most immediately recognizable to people on the album. Likewise, the music from Rob Roy and Braveheart was put on with an eye towards the current and the popular. We had the wonderful association there with Jerry O'Sullivan, who is one of the premier uilleann pipe players in the United States, and pipes are featured prominently in both of those works. O'Sullivan's March, by the way, is the traditional march that the Chieftains adapted for the Rob Roy soundtrack, but the main title from Braveheart was written lock, stock, and barrel by James Horner. It's not in any way traditional or Celtic in that, except for the fact that it takes place on a Celtic movie.
Which is what, to track 5?
Yeah, of course, Highway to Kilkenny and The Cat That Rambles, tracks 5 and 7, are favorite numbers in the show of Cherished Ladies, the Irish folk group that we have performed with frequently. Joni Madden, over the last couple of years that we've been performing together, has become a good friend. One of the great payoffs of that for me is that she was the soloist. That's the piper.
Yes.
She was the soloist at my wife's and my wedding, so that was a nice connection there. Those two pieces, tracks 5 and 7, lumping them together, are just, I mean, they're pure energy. There's so much going on in them. I think the music is really, really infectious, and it was fun to figure out a way to try to stick an 85-piece orchestra into that sort of a sound.
In general, it's a very lively disc. A lot of the songs.
Well, it seems to go back and forth between some very, very introspective, beautiful ballads like Mwishola, track 6, which is actually pronounced Mwishola, by the way, the one that looks like Mag Scola.
Oh yes. Okay.
And actually, on the back, if you're looking at the back of your album, it's spelled wrong. It's Scola, not Seola. We have a typo. You know, your first disc shows up, and you start immediately looking for what word could have been misspelled on 50,000 units of the thing that were just shipped.
You don't get a proof these days?
We do get a proof, actually, and it seemed to be spelled correctly on the proof, so it's one of those ghost in the machine moments, I think. But the Celtic music in general has this really high-octane, high-energy, gotta-dance sort of feeling on one end, and rather beautiful introspective ballads on the other, which is, I think, what makes pieces like Mwishola stand out so much on this album. There's so much energy around them, and they're so contemplative in nature.
Although a lot of the disc, I find that they're a little monotonous after a while, where this is not.
Well, that was our big, you've hit one of the big concerns on the head when we were picking repertoire. You're right. I mean, there's so many traditional Irish folk groups. You put the disc on, and one reel just goes into another reel, and there is a sameness that kind of sets in. In folk music, that's generally true. We tried to take from as many different sources as possible to try to get a disc that really was as varied as it could be.
Well, definitely achieved that. Okay. Track 7, The Cat.
Well,
Rebels to the Child.
That's pretty much connected to Highway to Kilkenny in terms of energy and feel and all that, and it's the same soloists involved too. Track 8, The Hebrides of Mendelssohn, is probably the most unusual thing to find on a Celtic album on any other Celtic album. This is an overture written in 1837 by the German composer Felix Mendelssohn, who, as a very young man, he was, I guess, 23, 24, traveled to the north coast of Scotland and was a tourist, basically. He took a tour of the Hebrides area and some of the beautiful caves and really haunting landscapes of that part of the world, and was so blown away by what he saw that he actually, while on the boat, scribbled down the initial theme of what was to become the Hebrides Overture. And we think that this is a good thing to include on the album. Number one, because it's a great piece of in the symphonic literature, but also because it kind of shows our roots. I mean, the Boston Pops Orchestra is one of the country's great orchestras, and that, to play music that is ours from the beginning I think makes sense on an album like this, but in a way still tilting our hand toward the Celtic tradition.
That's not the last track, is it?
No. Then we have The Fair Day from an Irish Symphony, which is a Celtic piece of symphonic literature composed by an Irish composer, Sir Hamilton Hardy, who was one of the first prominent Irish composers and conductors in the British Isles in the 19th century. The two pieces after that, tracks 10 and 11, are two pieces by a man named Turlough O'Carolan. And Turlough was perhaps the first great Irish national composer. He was a contemporary, roughly, of Bach and Handel. This puts him in the first half of the 18th century. But he was a blind Irish poet and harpist who traveled around the country writing tunes basically in exchange for his room and board, and an occasional pint of Guinness, we're told, too. And his music is really treasured by people who love Irish folk music. There are thousands of his tunes that have been preserved, and we set a couple of ones that we thought would be particularly engaging for our audience.
Well, that's an interesting story. Behind that. Okay, the next track.
And the next set of tracks, tracks 12 through 15, is the Four Scottish Dances of Malcolm Arnold. Malcolm Arnold is a prominent British composer, known probably best to general audiences for his movie score, especially Bridge Over the River Kwai. But he is also a successful symphonic composer who wrote many pieces in a kind of a light classical sort of vein, and these Four Scottish Dances date from 1907, I believe, and they're just they take Scottish dance forms and Scottish dance rhythms and produce something really exciting with them, I think. The last track, track 16, is the track that is called "It's Been Real." We needed to put a good pun in there somewhere, and it is actually a compilation of four different tunes that have been treated by one or another Celtic rock groups in the sort of updated Celtic tradition. One of the tunes on there, a tune called Boffy, Flow and Spike, is a tune by Van Morrison. There's also a tune by the Irish group Solace on there, and this is kind of I guess maybe the opposite end of the spectrum from the Hebrides. It really shows where Celtic music, is going perhaps in the next century. But the amazing thing about all great folk music traditions is they can be interpreted and reborn in a lot of different guises, and they're still attractive. And I think that's one of the exciting things about this music as well.
Now, where do you take this disc anyway? As far as you said, you do a little bit of promotion behind it in general, but you let the company.
Well, the company does most of that work, but I mean, the promotion is driven by BMG, but of course I'm a willing participant in it. A lot of what I do is interviews and that sort of thing. A lot of what BMG is trying to do in the marketing of this disc is to seek out not only the traditional Boston Pops audience, but also an audience that is more inclined to buy specifically Celtic folk music records. So there's a lot of niche marketing going on, and a lot of selling it into the smaller stores that specialize in Celtic history, Celtic culture, and that sort of thing, as well as the Tower Records and HMV sort of chains. And you might imagine too that there's a particular push in Boston because Boston is known to have something of an Irish population.
And lots of Irish pubs these days.
Yes, indeed, lots of Irish pubs to hawk the album in.
In fact, this edition we feature a lot of the Irish pubs, and you're mentioned in two of them, so you're a regular.
Oh wow! I must be showing up at these things.
Are you showing? Obviously, you're showing up.
Well, I've had a couple
of
great
Mr. Dooley's.
Dooley's, when which is a great old place. We were introduced to Dooley's by the members of Cherish the Ladies and Eileen Ivers and a couple of other Irish musicians who came along with them, and it was an absolutely wonderful time. A few of us from the Pops showed up along with them, and we ended up closing the place. And the last hour or so, the musicians grabbed their instruments and started jamming for the benefit of the paying customers. And we ended up having a great time. So I guess I should show up. I should show up more often.
When was this?
During the recording of the album, which was last May.
Wow, must have been quite a night.
It was. It was obviously after the last night we recorded the album, not the first night, or we probably wouldn't have gotten through the rest of the album.
So you collaborated with them? Will you be collaborating with other artists in future projects, or is that something?
Well, we try to bring different soloists onto each of the albums to give them a different taste and to push them towards perhaps a slightly different market. And so, it'll be a very album-by-album sort of thing to see if the soloists are really fit within the context of the album. But in this case, we thought that they were really they were important additions.
What audience are you trying to reach with the Pops these days?
Well, I think the simple answer to that is we're trying to reach the widest possible audience. I think the Pops has gotten an undeserved reputation for, being a very kind of safe, middle-of-the-road sort of entertainment alternative that people my age would say, well, gee, my parents loved that group, and I would really love it to be a resource to a lot wider demographic than that, to not do anything to disengage its traditional audience, but to do a lot to make sure that, the 35 and 40-year-olds and people with families and even people coming out of college find something worthwhile in what we do as well.
And how do you bring that about? Do you with the selections of
part of it is by programming, part of it is by trying to market concerts in different directions, not just make everything all a one-size-fits-all sort of concert experience. And we've been doing some of that in the Pops. I think there's more that can be done, but even albums like this serve to break a lot of stereotypes about what a Boston Pops experience is like.
Do you have a choice of any of the future releases when you have
Well, we always have a choice about these things. They're often suggested, and we bat them around for a while. The next album that's coming out, the fourth one, which will be out in October, is a Christmas album, because that's, as you can imagine, a rather necessary part of the of the repertoire. And the albums after that are still up in the air, but we won't be recording them for another year, so we have a little time to think about it.
The releases you have here too, Christmas out, this with a St. Patrick's Day tie-in, have long shelf lives year after year.
That was, frankly, I think that was a lot of their idea as well. That the Celtic album might become, especially in Boston, a perennial, and the Christmas albums are known for everyone to have that sort of shelf life to them. And Running Wild was successful beyond anybody's wildest expectations, and we'll just have to hope that they continue to be as lucky.
What do you feel that was so successful?
Don't know. It hit the right combination of being a good product that everybody fell in love with the album, and being marketed in a somewhat different sort of way, a little hep, a little modern and irreverent and off the cuff for an album of popular music by a band leader who's been dead over 50 years, and it really seemed to work out to hit perfectly. It both captured the traditional audience, my parents and grandparents' age, who grew up listening to Glenn Miller, and it also seemed to play well in a younger group as well. So, for whatever reason, I'm glad it did.
Well, my father loves that album. He just said his opinion is that he never heard it so, done so well. The quality of modern day recording as well. It's really great to have.
We had a great time doing the album, and we really are, I think, all very proud of the way it came out. And my dad's the same way. I think no matter how many other albums I do, that'll remain his favorite one. So, so we took care of that, but no problem. And thanks for the interest. Glad you liked the album.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you, Wayne. Bye-bye.